The Discovery of the Treasure Isles. From a manuscript found on a bookstall. It was on the 26th of October, 1760, at 27 minutes past 10 o'clock a.m., that I shook hands for the last time with those worthy merchants and shipowners, Messrs. Fisher, Clark, and Fisher of Bristol. I went at once on board the Mary Jane, then lying alongside the drawbridge by St. Augustine's Parade, in the very heart of the old city. It was my first command, so I stepped on deck with some little pride of heart, and bade the men weigh anchor. My exultation may be pardoned when it is recollected that I was only 26 years of age, and naturally thought it a fine thing to be a captain of a tight little trading schooner like the Mary Jane, with a valuable cargo on board, and a mate, 3 sailors, and a boy under my absolute authority. The flags were flying from every masthead and steeple, and the bells were pealing clamorously as we worked out of port that morning, for it was the very day of the King's Ascension, and all Bristol was wild with loyalty. The writer alludes, evidently, to King George III, who was proclaimed throughout the kingdom on 26th October 1760. King George II having died suddenly at Kensington on the 25th. I remember as well as if it were yesterday how the sailors cheered from the ships as we went down the Avon, and how my men threw up their hats in reply and shouted, "Long live King George!" The Avon, however, was soon left behind, and we entered the Bristol Channel with a favourable wind, all sail set, and a sky brilliant with sunshine above our heads. We were bound, I should observe, for Jamaica, and carried a cargo consisting chiefly of printed goods, hardware, and cutlery, which it was my duty to deliver to the consignee at Kingston. This done, my instructions were to ship a return cargo of cotton, indigo, rum, and other West Indian products. Perhaps it may be as well to add that the Mary Jane carried about 100 tons burthen, that my name is William Barlow, and my mate's name was Aaron Taylor. The Mary Jane was not a quick sailor, as I soon discovered, but she was a good, sound, steady little craft, and I consoled myself by remembering that safety was better than speed. It was dusk before we reached Lundy Island, and almost daylight next morning when we passed the Land's End. This was slow work, but as the wind had shifted a point or two during the night, I made the best of matters, and tried to hope we should do better by and by. After tossing about somewhat roughly off the Bay of Biscay, we made Cape Finisterre on the 4th of November, and on the 18th put in at Terceira for water. Having remained here for the best part of 2 days, we put to sea again on the evening of the 20th. The wind now began to set in more and more against us, and ended by blowing steadily from the south, so that although we had glorious weather overhead, we made almost as little way as if we had had storms to contend against. At length, after a week of ineffectual beating about, just as I was going to turn the ship's head and run back to Terceira, the breeze shifted suddenly to the north. The northwest would have suited us better, but if we could not get exactly the wind we most wanted, we were thankful, at all events, to tack about and make such progress as was possible. Thus we went forward slowly towards the tropics, attended by perpetual sunshine and cloudless skies, and enjoying a climate that grew milder and more delicious every day. The incidents of our voyage up to this time had been few and unimportant. A Dutch merchantman seen one morning in the offing, a porpoise caught by one of the crew, a flight of swallows on the wing, a shark following the ship. These and similar trifles were all the events that befell us for many a week. Events which are nothing when related, and yet afford matter for vivid interest to those on shipboard. At length, on the 15th of December, we entered the Tropic of Cancer, and on the 19th sailed into a light sea fog, which surprised us very much at such a season and in such a latitude, but which was welcome nevertheless, for the sun's heat was now becoming intense, and seemed as if it would burn the very deck beneath our feet. All that day the fog hung low upon the sea, the wind fell, and the waters were lulled almost to a calm. My mate predicted a hurricane, but no hurricane came. On the contrary, sea and air stagnated more and more, and the last breath of wind died away as the sun went down. Then the sudden tropical night closed in, and the heat grew more oppressive than before. I went to my cabin to write, as was my custom in the evening, but though I wore only a thin linen suit and kept every porthole open, I felt as if the cabin was a coffin and would suffocate me. Having borne it till I could bear it no longer, I threw the pen aside and went on deck again. There I found Aaron Taylor keeping the first watch, and our youngest seaman, Joshua Dunn, at the helm. "Close night, mate," said I. "Queerest night I ever saw, sir, in these latitudes," replied Aaron. "What way do we make?" "None, sir, hardly. Scarce one not an hour." "Have the men all turned in?" "All, sir, except Dunn and me." "Then you may turn in too, mate," said I. "I'll keep this watch and the next myself." The mate touched his hat, and with a glad "Aye, aye, sir," disappeared down the companion ladder. We were so small a crew that I always took my turn at the watch, and tonight, feeling it impossible to stay below, willingly charged myself with the double duty. It was now about 10 o'clock. There was something almost awful in the heavy stillness of the night, and in the thin, white, ghastly fog that folded round us on all sides, like a shroud. Pacing to and fro along the solitary deck, with no other sounds to break the silence than the murmuring of the water along the ship's side, and the creaking of the wheel in the hands of the steersman, I fell into a profound reverie. I thought of my friends far away, of my old home among the Mendip Hills, of Bessie Robinson, who had promised to become my wife when I went back after this voyage, of 1,000 hopes and projects far enough removed from the schooner Mary Jane or any soul on board. From these dreams I was suddenly roused by the voice of Joshua Dunn shouting in a quick, startled tone, "Ship ahoy!" I was alive in a moment at this cry, for we were at war with both France and Spain at the time, and it would have been no pleasant matter to fall in with an enemy, especially as there had been some fierce fights more than once in these very waters since the war began. So I pulled up in my walk, looked sharply round on all sides, and saw nothing but fog. "Whereabouts, Josh?" I cried. "Coming right up, sir, under our weather bow," replied the steersman. I stepped aft, and staring steadily in the direction indicated, saw, sure enough, the faint glimmer of a couple of lanterns coming up through the fog. to dash down into my cabin, seize a brace of pistols and my speaking trumpet, and spring up again on deck, just as the spectral outline of a large brig loomed up almost within a stone's throw of the ship's side, was the work of a moment. I then stood silent and waited, ready to answer if hailed, and willing enough to slip along unobserved in the fog, if our formidable neighbour passed us by. I had scarcely waited a moment, however, before a loud voice, made louder by the use of the trumpet, rang through the thick air, crying, "Ship ahoy! What name? Where from? Whither bound?" To which I replied, "Trading schooner Mary Jane, from Bristol to Jamaica. What ship? Where from? Whither bound?" There was a moment's silence. Then the same voice replied, "The Adventure, homeward bound." The reply was informal. "Where from?" I repeated. "What cargo?" Again there seemed some hesitation on the part of the stranger, and again, after an instant's pause, he answered, "From the Treasure Isles, with gold and jewels." From the Treasure Isles, with gold and jewels. I could not credit my ears. I had never heard of the Treasure Isles in my life. I had never seen them on any chart. I did not believe that any such islands existed. "What isles?" I shouted, the question springing to my lips as the doubt flashed on my mind. "The Treasure Isles." "What bearings?" "Latitude 2230, longitude 6315. "Have you any chart?" "Yes. Will you show it?" "Aye, aye. Come aboard and see." I bade the steersman lay to. The stranger did the same. Presently her great hull towered up beside us like a huge rock. A rope was thrown, a chain ladder lowered, and I stepped on deck. I looked round for the captain. A tall, gaunt man stood before me, with his belt full of pistols and a speaking trumpet under his arm. Beside him stood a sailor with a torch, the light from which flickered redly through the thick air and showed some 20 men or more, gathered round the binnacle. All were silent as silent as ghosts, and, seen through the mist, looked as unsubstantial. The captain put his hand to his hat, looked at me with eyes that glittered like live coals, and said, "You want to see the chart of the islands?" "I do, sir." "Follow me." The sailor lighted us down. The captain went first, and I followed. As I passed down the cabin stairs, I eased the pistols in my belt, ready for use if necessary. For there was something strange about the captain and his crew, something strange in the very build and aspect of the ship that puzzled me and put me on my guard. The captain's cabin was large, low, and gloomy, lighted by an oil lamp swinging from the roof, like a murderer swinging in chains. Fitted with old carved furniture that might have been oak, but was as black as ebony, and plentifully garnished about the walls with curious weapons of all kinds of antique shapes and workmanship. On the table lay a parchment chart, elaborately drawn in red ink and yellow with age. The captain silently laid his finger on the very center of the parchment, and kept his glittering eyes fixed full upon me. I leaned over the chart, silent as himself, and saw 2 islands, a greater and a lesser. A greater and a less, lying just in the latitude he had named, with a narrow strait between them. The larger was somewhat crescent-shaped, the smaller inclined to a triangular form, and lay up to the northwest of the other, just in this fashion. Both were very irregular in the outline. The little island seemed hilly throughout. The large one was scooped into a deep bay on the northeast side, and was piled up into what appeared like a lofty mountain between the inner shore of the bay and the western coast. Not far from the southern side of this mountain, a small river was seen to take its rise, flow in a northeasterly direction, and empty itself into the bay. "And these," said I, drawing a long breath, "are the Treasure Isles." The captain nodded grimly. "Are they under French or Spanish government?" "They are under no government," replied the captain. "Unclaimed lands?" "Wholly unclaimed." "Are the natives friendly?" "There are none." "None? Then the islands are uninhabited." The captain nodded again. My amazement became more profound every moment. "Why do you call them the Treasure Isles?" I asked, unable to keep my eyes from the map. The captain of the adventure stepped back, pulled aside a coarse canvas screen that had till now closed in the farther end of the cabin, and pointed to a symmetrical pile of golden ingots. Solid golden ingots, about 7 feet high and 4 deep, built row above row in transverse layers, as a builder might have laid the bricks in a wall. I rubbed my eyes. I looked from the gold to the captain, from the captain to the map, from the map back to the gold. The captain drew the screen to its place with a hollow laugh and said, "There are 257 tons weight of silver in the hold, and 6 chests of precious stones." I put my hand to my head and leaned against the table. I was dazzled, bewildered, giddy. "I must go back to my ship," said I, still staring covetously at the chart. The captain took an odd-looking, long-necked bottle and a couple of quaint beakers with twisted stems from a locker close by, filled out a glassful of some kind of rich amber-colored cordial, and handed it to me with a nod of invitation. Looking closely at the liquid, I saw that it was full of little sparkling fragments of gold ore. "It is the genuine golden water," said the captain. His fingers were like ice, the cordial like fire. It blistered my lips and mouth, and ran down my throat like a stream of liquid lava. The glass fell from my hand and was shattered into 1,000 fragments. "Confound the liquor!" gasped I. "How hot it is!" The captain laughed his hollow laugh again, and the cabin echoed to it like a vault. "Your health," said he, and emptied his own beaker as if it had been a glass of water. I ran up the cabin stairs with my throat still on fire. The captain followed at a couple of strides. "Good night," said I, with one foot already on the chain ladder. "Did you not say latitude 2230? "Yes." "And longitude 6315? "Yes." "Thanks, sir, and good night." "Good night," replied the captain, his eyes glowing in his head like fiery carbuncles. "Good night, and a pleasant voyage to you." With this he burst into a laugh louder and more hollow than ever, a laugh which was instantly taken up, echoed and re-echoed by all the sailors aboard. I sprang down upon my own deck in a towering passion, and swore at them pretty roundly for a set of unmannerly lubbers. But this seemed only to redouble their infernal mirth. Then the adventure hove off, faded again to a mere spectre, and disappeared in the mist, just as the last peal of laughter died away, mockingly, in the distance. The Mary Jane now resumed her course, and I my watch. The same heavy silence brooded over the night. The same fog closed around our path. I alone was changed. My entire being seemed to have undergone a strange and sudden revolution. The whole current of my thoughts, the very hopes, aims, and purposes of my life were turned into a new channel. I thought of nothing but the treasure isles and their untold wealth of gold and jewels. Why should not I seize upon my share of the spoil? Had I not as good a right to enrich myself as any other man that sailed the seas? I had but to turn the ship's course and possess the wealth of kingdoms. Who was to prevent me? Who should gainsay me? The schooner was not my own vessel, it was true. But would not her owners be more than satisfied if I brought them back double the value of her cargo in solid ingots? I might do this, and still have fabulous treasure for myself. It seemed like madness to delay even for a single hour, and yet I hesitated. I had no right to deviate from the route prescribed by my employers. I was bound to deliver my cargo at Jamaica within a given time, wind and weather permitting, and we had already lost weeks upon the way. Beset by alternate doubts and desires, I went to my berth at the close of the second watch. I might as well have tried to sleep in the powder magazine of a burning ship. If I closed my eyes, the parchment chart lay before them as plainly as when I saw it on the captain's table. If I opened them, the two islands appeared as if traced upon the darkness in lines of fire. At length I felt I could lie there inactive no longer. I rose, dressed, lit my lamp, took out my own book of charts, and set myself to enter the treasure isles in their places on the map. Having drawn them in accurately with pencil, and then traced over the pencilings with ink, I felt a little calmer, and turned in again. This time I fell asleep from sheer exhaustion, and woke, dreaming of riches, just at dawn. My first proceeding was to go on deck and take an observation of our position. The result of this observation was to show me, beyond all doubt, that we were then distant about 72 hours' sail from the coast of the larger island, whereupon I yielded to a temptation stronger than my will or my reason, and changed the ship's course. That decisive step once taken, I fell into a state of feverish eagerness, which allowed me no rest of body or mind. I could neither sleep, nor eat, nor sit still, nor remain in one spot for 3 minutes together. I went up to the masthead 20 times a day on the lookout for land, and raged against the fog, as if it were sent from heaven on purpose to torment me. My seamen thought I was mad, and so I was. Mad with the thirst of gain, as many a sane man has been before and since. At length, on the morning of the 3rd day, Aaron Taylor came to me in my cabin, and ventured on a respectful remonstrance. We had already deviated, he said, 2 degrees from our course, and were making straight for the Bahama Islands, instead of for Jamaica. Had we kept steadily on our way, we should have shortly touched at Puerto Rico for provisions and water. But both were running short, and could not possibly hold out for anything like the time it would take us to make land in the present direction. In reply to this statement, I showed my chart with the 2 islands sketched in according to their bearings. He looked at them, shook his head, and said very earnestly, "I have sailed in these latitudes for the last 15 years, your honour, and I'll take my Bible oath there are no such islands." Whereupon I flew into a violent fit of anger, as if the mate had presumed to doubt my word, and forbade him ever to speak to me on the subject again. My temper, in short, was as much impaired as my peace of mind, or indeed as my sense of duty, and gold, accursed gold, was at the bottom of it all. Thus the third day passed on, and still the fog hung round and seemed to follow us. The seamen did their work sullenly, and whispered together when my back was turned. The mate looked pale and grave, like a man whose mind was full of anxious thoughts. For my part, I was more resolute than ever, and silently vowed to shoot the first sailor who showed a sign of mutiny. To this end I cleaned and primed my pistols, and hid a Spanish dagger between my waistcoat and my belt. Thus the long, monotonous hours went on, and the sun sank, and yet no land, nor indication of land, had appeared on any side. 65 hours out of the 72 had now gone by, and it seemed as if the remaining 7 would never expire. To sleep was impossible. So I paced the deck all night, and watched as eagerly for the first gleam of dawn as if my life depended on it. As the morning drew nearer, my excitement became almost more than I could bear. I even felt as if I would gladly have put off the moment which I had been so passionately awaiting. At length the eastward grey grew visibly lighter, and was followed by a broad crimson flush all across the heavens. I went up aloft, trembling in every limb. As I reached the topgallant-mast, the sun rose. I closed my eyes, and for a moment dared not look around me. When I opened them again, I saw the fog lying all over the calm surface of the sea in fleecy tracts of vapour, like half-transparent snow, and straight ahead, distant some 10 miles or so in a direct line, a pale blue peak rising above the level of the mist. At the sight of that peak my heart gave a great leap, and my head turned giddy, for I recognized it instantly as the mountain mapped out between the bay and western coast of the larger island. As soon as I could command my agitation sufficiently, I pulled out a pocket-glass, and surveyed it narrowly. The glass only confirmed the evidence of my eyes. I then came down, intoxicated with success, and triumphantly bade Taylor go aloft and report all that he should see. The mate obeyed, but declared that there was nothing visible but sky and fog. I was enraged. I would not believe him. I sent the boy up, and then one of the seamen, and both returned with the same story. At last I went up again myself, and found that they were right. The fog had risen with the rising of the sun, and the peak had utterly disappeared. All this, however, made no real difference. The land was there, I had seen it, and we were sailing for it, right before the wind. In the meantime I caused the ship's boat to be got ready, directed that a bag of biscuit, a keg of brandy, a couple of cutlasses, a couple of muskets, a couple of sacks, and a good store of ammunition should be thrown into it, and provided myself with a pocket compass, tinder-box, hatchet, and small telescope. I then took a slip of parchment, and having written upon it the name and destination of the Mary Jane, together with the date of the year and month, and my own signature as her captain, enclosed the whole in a stout glass bottle, sealed it down with my own seal, and stowed it away in the boat with the rest of the stores. This bottle and a small Union Jack which I tied round my waist like a sash were destined to be hoisted on the mountain-top as soon as we succeeded in climbing up to it. My preparations for landing were but just completed when the mate sung out, "Breakers ahead!" I ran at once on deck. The fog had grown denser than ever. There was no land in sight, though I knew we must be within a mile of the shore. Not even the breakers were visible, but we could hear the roaring of them quite distinctly. I gave orders to lay to immediately, and taking Taylor aside, told him that it was my intention to go ashore in the boat without a moment's delay. He flung up his hands and implored me not to venture. "I swear to you, sir," said he emphatically, that there's no land within 400 miles of us on any side. These are coral reefs, and to take a boat amongst them in this fog is to rush on certain destruction. For heaven's sake, sir, stay aboard at least till the fog clears off." But I only laughed and refused to listen to him. "There's land, mate," said I, "within a mile. I saw it with my own eyes not 2 hours ago, and it's a land, let me tell you, that will make the fortune of every man on board. As for the breakers, I'll risk them. If the boat is swamped, it will be no great hardship to swim to shore." "It will be death, sir," groaned the mate. Of this, however, I took no notice, but proceeded to give my instructions. I left the command of the Mary Jane in his hands during my absence, and desired him, if the fog cleared, to anchor in the large bay off which I knew we were lying. I then added that I expected to get back to the vessel before nightfall, but ordered that an exploring party should be sent ashore to search for me, if I had not returned by the end of 48 hours. To all this the honest fellow assented reluctantly enough, and bade me farewell with as sorrowful an air as if he were attending me to the scaffold. The boat was then lowered. I took Josh Dunn for my rower, laid my own hands to the helm, and gave the word to put off. The men on board uttered a feeble cheer as we parted company, and in less time than it takes to tell, the Mary Jane was hidden from us by the fog. "Josh," said I, as the sound of the breakers grew more and more audible, "if the boat ships water, we shall have to swim for it." "Aye, aye, sir," replied Josh briskly. "Straight ahead," I continued, "lies dry land. Behind us the Mary Jane. But a small schooner is more easily missed in a fog, Josh, than an island as big as Malta or Madeira." "Aye, aye, sir," replied Josh as before. "If you're wise," said I, "you'll strike out for the shore, as I shall. In the meanwhile we had better fill our pockets with biscuit, for fear of accidents." I then divided the contents of the biscuit bag, and we stuffed our pockets as full as they could hold. By this time the noise had so increased that we could scarcely hear each other's voices, and the white foam was already visible through the mist. "Steady, Josh!" cried I. "There are rough seas before us." The words were scarcely past my lips when we were tossing in the midst of the surf, drenched with spray and well-nigh deafened by the roaring of the waters. I saw directly that no boat could live in such a whirlpool. Ours did not hold out for 5 minutes. Flung from billow to billow like a mere cockleshell, she laboured onwards for something like 100 yards, filled, heeled over, and disappeared suddenly from beneath our feet. Prepared for this catastrophe, I rose like a cork, glued my arms to my sides, kept my mouth and eyes shut, and suffered the waves to carry me along. Finding, however, that instead of bearing me towards the shore, they only dashed me hither and thither among the breakers, I presently gave up all hope of floating in, and being an excellent swimmer, struck out for land. Blinded, buffeted, breathless, now carried to the summit of a mighty wave, now buried in the very heart of a mountain of green sea, now fighting forward again in spite of wind and spray, I struggled on with a superhuman energy that only the love of life and riches could have inspired. Suddenly my feet touched land, lost it, touched again. I threw all my strength into one last desperate effort, precipitated myself through the raging foam that broke like a vast barrier all along the shore, and fell, face downwards, on the pebbly beach beyond. I lay there for some minutes, just within reach of the spray, and beyond the line of the breakers, so utterly spent and stupefied as to be scarcely conscious of the danger from which I had escaped. Recovering, however, by degrees, I rose. looked around, and found myself on a shelving belt of shingle that reached far away on either side till lost in the fog. Beyond the shingle ran a line of low cliffs, along the summits of which, looking dim and distant in the misty air, rose the feathery tops of a far-stretching forest of coconut palms. Here, then, was the island, palpable, undeniable, actual. I took up a handful of loose pebbles, stamped on the shingle, ran along the beach. In all this there was no illusion. I was awake, sober, in full possession of my senses. All was as it seemed, all tried, and proved, and real. Passing instantaneously from a state of wonder, half confused, half incredulous, to a wild, unbounded joy, I ran about for some minutes like a maniac, shouting, leaping, clapping my hands, and giving way to the most extravagant demonstrations of triumph. In the midst of this folly, the thought of Josh Dunn flashed across my mind. I grew sober in a moment. What had become of the poor fellow? I had never seen him from the instant when the boat capsized. Had he swum for the ship or the shore? Was he saved or lost? I went backwards and forwards along the beach, dreading to see his corpse washed up by every coming wave, but found no trace of him in any direction. Convinced at length that further search was hopeless, I gave it up, and turned my face and footsteps towards the cliffs.